they'll be able to reopen, but some say the government's announcement falls short of what's needed. I'm Chris Hensing. Thanks for joining us. We start tonight with an update on COVID-19. We have 43 new cases today announced by the health unit. That's the second highest single-day total that we've seen throughout the pandemic so far in Windsor, Essex. There's also an update on long-term care homes. Country Village in Woodsley is now in an outbreak after a staff member tested positive for the coronavirus. It's the only active outbreak at a long-term care or retirement home in Windsor, Essex as of now. And on those 43 new cases that were announced today, 34 of them are among farm workers. The health unit says that this is because of mass testing in the agri-food sector. We also know that 2 migrant workers have died in the last week and a half after testing positive for COVID-19. We'll bring you the latest on the coronavirus among workers momentarily, but first, there's a growing call to defund police across Canada and the U.S. It's a conversation around this that's happening here in Windsor as well, coming in the wake of the death of George Floyd. It's focused largely on reducing police budgets and reallocating that to other public services. For more on this, we're joined by CBC's Tamina Aziz. She's just outside of the police headquarters tonight. Tamina, what are members of the community who are pushing for this saying?
Well, Chris, I spoke to a law student here in Windsor named Princess Doe. She's also the president of a student-led advocacy group which aims to fight anti-Black racism here in Windsor. Now, she is for defunding the police. She says the city needs to work on diverting funds away from the police and finding different alternatives to policing like social service workers and healthcare professionals, which she says will provide adequate safety for everyone.
I feel that many people in the community feel the same as others around the world in terms of the police haven't, to be frank, provided the most adequate safety for all communities, right? If you're Black, if you are Indigenous, a person of color growing up, you know immediately that you're going to be treated differently and be perceived differently than someone who is white, right? And the police might not always, you don't feel a sense of security or safety with the police.
She also says police services make up the most or make up the highest operating budget here in Windsor. Police services make up more than 20% of the operating budget, and that is compared to community development and health services that make up about 7%. Now, she also says Windsor needs to start having these conversations. She says it's not as radical as people might think once they do the research and realize what defunding actually means. She says it's great that people are in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, but now is the time to make specific demands. And right now she wants to consider how defunding the police might look like here in Windsor.
Now, Tamina, we'll cover in this story. You spoke to some city officials, people who are in charge of the police services budget. What are they saying?
Yes, Chris, I spoke to Ward 3 Councillor Reno Bordelin and the Mayor of Windsor. They both have very different approaches to this matter. Bordelin, who sits on the Police Services Board, says he is for reallocating funds from police and putting it towards frontline workers, people who can address mental health issues, essentially. He says it's been a topic of discussion for many years now, and that government agencies have been defunding other areas like mental health and addictions, which are issues police are increasingly dealing with. Mayor Dilkins, on the other hand, says that he's open to having these conversations now, but it is more complicated than just reallocating funds.
I guess we really need to ask ourselves the question, what will defunding the police do to help bring that conversation further along? And I'm not sure that saying defunding the police is going to advance the ultimate goal at the end of the day. And so it's a conversation that we should have, we should talk about. You know, if there's widespread community interest, let's have a conversation about what that means. Because I think, you know, when we drill down further into some of the detail, I think there would be many that would be concerned about the notion of defunding the police service.
He says he's working on hiring more police officers from different backgrounds, which should help with bridging communities and training officers. I should also note that Premier Doug Ford spoke to reporters today and told them that he doesn't believe in cutting police budgets. We also reached out to Windsor Police Services for comment or a statement, but they couldn't send one in time today. Chris.
Thanks for this, Tamina. The CBC's Tamina Aziz live in downtown Windsor tonight. Today marks the official launch of the new assessment center in Leamington, specifically an assessment center for farm workers in the Leamington and Kingsville area. Today, there were 160 people who were tested. It comes a day after an organization for migrant workers released a critical report calling for change in the temporary foreign worker system. Dale Molnar has the latest.
Highline Mushrooms was the first to utilize the testing center. The president and CEO says he feels it's their responsibility to do the testing.
We've all worked collaboratively to figure out that there are different steps in this solution, and testing at this point is one of those steps.
A report by the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, which represents migrant workers in Canada, revealed some of the complaints they have received from more than 1,000 workers about their living and working conditions. The organization wants the federal government to give the workers permanent residence status to give them more protection if they want to blow the whistle on abuse. The report also comes with a set of recommendations to make things better for workers. Hamer wouldn't address all the points in the report, but he did talk about some of the ones related to COVID-19. He says his company is taking all the precautions it can, like quarantining those who come in contact with the virus.
Mandatory PPE and masks for all associates, social distancing on buses, mandatory assigned lunch slots so that we know who eats lunch and who takes breaks, next to the same associates every single day to help with the contact tracing, plexiglass in between the workstations wherever possible.
He says they put up workers in 45 houses throughout the area with not more than 6 people to a house. The workers have been given cards with a confidential message line to give feedback on what can be improved. The executive director of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change says reform still needs to happen at the federal level, such as unannounced inspections and the ability for workers to leave a job if they don't feel safe.
A good employer can do a bad thing. A bad employer can do a good thing. What we want is a set of laws that protect workers so that it's not about the goodness of an employer, but it is about correct legal application of appropriate rules.
The Alliance reported that workers from Green Hill Produce in Kentbridge had their COVID symptoms ignored, they didn't get sick days, and when they tested positive for COVID-19, they were moved to 2 houses with 20 workers, sharing 3 bathrooms. The workers say they were living in cramped quarters. The owner of the greenhouse would not comment today on the report. Testing at the recreation complex in Leamington continues tomorrow. Results won't be known for 72 hours. Dale Molnar, CBC News, Windsor.
As more businesses start to reopen throughout Ontario, Phase 2 launching on Friday, Windsor, Essex is among the areas that have been exempt from this next phase for now. But starting on Friday, all childcare centres across the province will be allowed to open their doors again. However, there's still worries about the safety protocols in place, the hefty fines for operators who don't follow the rules.
What we're signaling today, and what we've sort of signaled quietly over the past week, is that childcare can reopen, technically effective Friday as part of the realignment with the Phase 2, but we know some of them will take additional time. And obviously our aim is to get this right, to do all of our due diligence to protect families and protect our kids and protect our staff.
Now, among some of those restrictions, a maximum of 10 people per room in a childcare center. That includes kids and staff. They'll screen for symptoms. You'll see stepped up cleaning and the removal of toys that could spread germs. Plus, centers must have a COVID-19 response plan in case someone is exposed to the virus. This raises questions about how these centers will be able to pay for these measures. The province says that support will be provided for cleaning and PPE, but childcare advocates say that there are many more expenses involved. Meanwhile, Ontario's reopening plan, Phase 2, has some apparent contradictions that have got people talking. For example, limits are being eased on places of worship, but not for weddings and funerals. Our Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley is digging into why.
A springtime wedding in pre-pandemic times, a happy occasion for everyone. Funerals, a necessary rite of passage for all cultures. attendance at both is restricted in Ontario under COVID-19 laws. Yet restrictions are now being relaxed for routine services, whether in a church, a mosque, or a temple, under the province's new rules. For a regular worship service, the building can fill to 30% of its capacity, allowing people to gather in the dozens. However, for a funeral or a wedding, the maximum number allowed is 10. What's the logic?
Yeah, so I asked the same question, Mike.
And the answer he got?
When it comes to weddings, people congregate from all over the province, depending on who's invited, and for tracing purposes, it's a lot harder to track someone opposed to a church that everyone has to sign in.
People who run funerals in Ontario say it makes no sense to keep a 10-person limit in place when church services can be far larger.
There's a lot of frustration, and rightly so, because this is such a serious thing. You know, you only lose your loved one once. There's no redo on this. So that time in your life only happens then. And if we can't address that and help people at the most difficult time in their lives, I think that's a shame, really.
There are other questions about Ontario's reopening plan. Consider Niagara Region and Waterloo Region, both equally close to the GTA with similar populations. There are 80 active confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Waterloo Region. It moves to Stage 2 on Friday. Niagara Region has 79 active cases, but it stays with Stage 1 restrictions in place. What's the explanation? Cases in Niagara spiked recently, says Ford.
A big chunk of that was migrant workers, but still, when the numbers shoot up, our medical team, we have no choice.
One other contradiction: in places that stay at Stage 1, you can get a massage, but you still can't get your hair cut. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, we did speak with some local business owners who say that they're disappointed that they're not being included in the reopening because they've been preparing for this.
The phone was blowing up. People were thinking we were opening, and appointments were already starting to be thought of and how we were going to do it and where they were going to go what spot they would get. And then it just kind of came down.
I'm really surprised. Very disappointed. And, you talk, everybody's ready.
Now, the City of Windsor will continue to keep arenas, pools, community centers, and libraries closed until further notice. In a news release, the mayor said the city supports the province's decision on the regional phased-in approach, and that in the meantime, the city continues to support businesses with Shop Local campaigns and providing hand sanitizer to entrepreneurs. In the meantime, Tourism Windsor Essex is doing what it can to help companies in that sector prepare to safely reopen.
Well, phase 2, you could look at it as we didn't reopen, but you could also look at it as much of the province did reopen. And as the province starts to reopen, we know that Windsor Essex will eventually open. But we are always, and always have been, following the guidelines of the government and health officials, and we will open when it's safe to do so.
Orr says 2020 will be a tough year for the tourism sector, but his organization is working to give companies tools like the latest visitor guides to promote staycations and road trips here in our area. And that hand sanitizer, well, they're handing out free buckets of that to companies as well. He says businesses will be counting on local consumers to help keep them afloat. Now, that push for tourism, it's a tough balance with the regional reopening. Again, the province letting certain areas reopen by health unit. Most of Ontario hit Stage 2 on Friday, but as we mentioned, Windsor Essex stays in Stage 1. Let's take a look at a map here. In orange on this map, all the places that are staying in Stage 1. So you see Windsor, Sarnia, Kitchener-Waterloo, Toronto, those big areas, Niagara-Hamilton area as well, all in Stage 1. Here's what parts of the provinces will be entering Stage 2 on Friday. That's in the green there. You can see Chatham, Kent, and London. They're going to enter that phase. But this just allows local health units to lift restrictions put in place by the province. They can decide if they're free to open or keep things closed. Stage 2 opens beauty salons. People can get their hair cut professionally. You can go get a manicure, pedicure, a new tattoo, open but under new restrictions. And with more businesses, there's also more community services, pools, splash pads, stuff you'd enjoy on a hot day. In stage 2, it can open up if the local health unit approves. Now, with these spaces nearby, areas that are entering stage 2, like Chatham, Kent, and London, if their health unit sees fit, I asked our medical officer of health here in Windsor how he feels about the regional approach and if people in this area should be getting in their cars this weekend to head to stage 2 areas. In Windsor, Essex being one of the ones that are still in stage 1 waiting for stage 2, places like Chatham, London, other places within a drivable distance are going into stage 2. What's your suggestion to people who might think about getting in that car and going to these services that are offered in other communities for people specifically in Windsor, Essex?
Well, I guess my advice to them would always be is to follow the public health recommendations. And even though some of these businesses are now legally allowed to be open, when you are visiting and going to any place which is open legally, there is a certain level of risk involved. All of us have to act together in the interest of our community and to support the community in the best possible way to get through this phase.
So the idea of someone in Windsor, Essex going to a community where they can get their hair cut, if they're following the rules in that community and are deciding that that's essential for whatever reason they believe, what's the advice that you would give to somebody trying to make that decision?
So I would go back to the same advice that, if you can avoid that trip, if you don't think that it's necessary, don't go and don't do that. But if you feel that you must go, who you're going with, how you're traveling, and when you are out there, ensuring that, if you can avoid any kind of close physical contact within 2 meters, please do that. And also, if you have some kind of immunocompromised condition, kind of chronic condition, please avoid visiting any of these places. When you're out there, in addition to the physical distancing piece, wear a cloth mask when it's appropriate. Wash your hands regularly and often, thoroughly with alcohol-based hand sanitizer or with soap and water. And do your work and come back to wherever you are from, just to limit the likelihood of contracting someone with a positive case.
We're living in tense and uncertain times right now. So here at CBC Windsor, we're doing something that might help soothe your spirits by celebrating unsung heroes in our community. And we'll be looking into how music might be good for the soul. We'll be chatting with local artists to see how they're dealing with the pandemic and getting their thoughts on the passionate calls to end anti-Black systemic racism across the United States and here in Canada. We'll have much more this Friday on Windsor Morning. But first, here's a sneak peek of our conversations with one local artist.
There was a country of people from the east, the west, and the north. There's a spirit you find in music when you're recording and you like it. When you listen to a song that you really connect to, man, it's nothing like it. Living in Africa where, everyone is Black, you really don't see that disparity. And when you get to this part of the world and you see in this 24th century and you see people still behaving this way, it just makes you question people's progressiveness. Like, how many years ago did they abolish slavery, and still we're battling this problem today, Police brutality has been happening long ago in the US, but the attention that this got now made me know and realize that we are progressing and we're getting there, and with more of this, we'll eventually get there. When they try to frustrate you, I go there by your side. See me stress, I don't fall for you.
Take a look at this drawing here by Windsor artist Nutu. It's dedicated to Windsor's frontline and essential workers, and this is how it was all put together. Tu was one of the recipients of funding from the city for arts, culture, and heritage projects in response to COVID-19. In this case, a time-lapse mural creation called Heroes of Windsor. The project's meaningful to her because she says there are so many people working hard during these times to keep everyone safe. She says that this was the least she could do to honor them. Stay with us. Colette Kennedy will have our weather when we come back. And joining us now for a live look at the weather is Colette Kennedy. If we look outside, we can see boats on the water, and on a day with a heat warning, it's okay to keep cool, but I have a feeling this is all about to twist, isn't it?
It is about to twist. You're exactly right, Chris. So yeah, we've got the heat today. The humidity, it's really not that bad. That's going to change tonight as we go into tomorrow. And not only that, but we do have the chance to see some strong storms as we get into this soupier air mass, and then a cold front is going to be cutting through. So probably see these thunderstorms kind of coming through, rolling through in waves. So I'll walk you through that, but just know that warning continues tomorrow, much more feeling like, 40 than that 35. And our temperatures may be creeping up a little bit too. The current temperature is 31, but 32.7 unofficial high today. We are the hot spot for Windsor. We're the hot spot in Ontario and all of Canada, although tied with Markham, Ontario, but still. A very warm day today, but still a little more than a degree off of a record. Humidex, though, see how it only bumps up a couple of degrees? That's because the dew points have been around the mid-teens. They're not that bad yet. They will be increasing. The other thing that will be increasing are the winds. Coming up overnight tonight, you'll get that into tomorrow morning, then a bit of a lull midday, and then some very strong storms out ahead of the cold front as it begins to come in as we get towards the supper hour. So my concerns through Leamington, Chatham, Kent, and all our regions where we're going to be seeing those winds strong and coming in off the lake where we've already got high water levels and flooding issues. So we have the quiet conditions this evening. Like you say, boats on the water, things looking good, but it all changes. And the risk of some of those storms being strong, certainly all the way back through southwestern Ontario to eastern Ontario, especially with the cold front. So not as much with the ones overnight tonight and tomorrow morning, but certainly as we get towards the afternoon, some torrential downpours are possible, some very strong wind gusts, damaging wind gusts, and yes, the risk of some tornadic activity, as that'll be coming through late afternoon and then into early evening. Now into Thursday, still breezy, some residual showers possible, but otherwise we'll really be seeing things changing and temperatures coming down behind that front for Thursday. So there you go, tomorrow afternoon, yes, feeling close 38 to 40. Thursday's temperature dramatically different with just 25 expected then.
Wow. But tomorrow, those winds too that you were showing, it's we'll certainly be keeping an eye on what's happening down there in Chatham, Kent. Thanks,
yes, and I'll be here with you for all of that.
Absolutely. Wouldn't have it any other way. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And coming up, we're going to take you to the funeral for George Floyd, the death that sparked nationwide protests in both the United States and here in Canada. George Floyd is being laid to rest today in his hometown of Houston.
This was not just a tragedy. It was a crime.
Now, during a private funeral celebrating Floyd's life, civil rights activist Al Sharpton paid tribute to other black victims of police violence. The families of Eric Garner, Michael Brown, and Trayvon Martin were among the hundreds in attendance, in addition to Floyd's relatives. The service caps off 6 days of mourning in several cities for a man whose murder in police custody became a touchstone issue about racial injustice. The video of the May 25th incident triggered global outrage and protests. During his last moments, Floyd had called for his mother as a Minneapolis police officer pressed a knee on his neck. He's being buried this afternoon next to her. 6:29 p.m. and that's it for CBC Windsor News. You can find more stories on our website, cbc.ca/Windsor. Thanks for watching us. Make sure you have yourself a great night.